My name is Margot Hayes, and I am 66 years of age. What I am about to share with you irrevocably altered the course of my life. The ceremony for my husband, Ernest, was the most somber day of my entire existence. Standing there beside his final resting place, I received a communication from an unknown sender that sent a shiver of unease through me. I am alive. That is not me in the coffin, I wrote back, my hands betraying my agitation. Who are you? The reply I received left me breathless. I cannot disclose my identity. They are observing. Do not place your trust in our sons. In that instant, my spirit was fractured. My world imploded when I observed Charles and Henry, my very own children, standing by the casket with unsettlingly composed visages. A profound sense of wrongness permeated the scene. Their tears appeared feigned, their embraces as cold as glacial ice. For a span of 42 years, Ernest had been my steadfast companion, my sanctuary, the very essence of my being. I first encountered him when I was 24, in the modest settlement of Spring Creek. We had both navigated the same unpaved country lanes, nurturing shared humble aspirations. I labored diligently, cleaning residences to provide for my ailing mother, while Ernest toiled in a small repair shop, a legacy from his father, fixing bicycles. Though our means were scant, our happiness was abundant. We possessed a treasure that wealth could not purchase, genuine affection. I vividly recall the initial moment he addressed me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was en route to the marketplace, clad in a faded green frock and shoes that had seen better days. He emerged from his workshop, his hands smudged with grease, and offered me a shy smile that instantly captivated my heart. "Good morning, Margot," he said, his voice gentle. "Might I examine your bicycle?" Though I did not own a bicycle, I fabricated a reason to engage him in conversation. That exchange blossomed into romantic meetings beneath the venerable oak tree in the heart of Town Square Park, which then evolved into vows of everlasting devotion, culminating in a simple, hope-filled wedding ceremony. The initial years presented considerable challenges. We resided in a humble dwelling with 2 bedrooms and a tin roof. During rainfall, we would strategically place basins throughout the house to collect the incessant leaks, yet our spirits remained undimmed. Ernest dedicated himself to his workshop from dawn until dusk. Meanwhile, I applied my skills to fashioning garments for the townswomen. The birth of Charles filled my heart with an immeasurable surge of joy. He was a beautiful infant, possessing his father's striking eyes and my own smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived, equally perfect in every way. I nurtured them with boundless love, often deferring my own needs to theirs. Ernest was an exemplary father. He would escort them on fishing excursions to the river on Sundays, impart his knowledge of mechanical repairs, and regale them with bedtime stories. I provided their sustenance, their attire, and their comfort during moments of distress. We were a close-knit family, or so I fervently believed. As they matured, subtle shifts began to manifest. Charles the elder harbored an unceasing ambition. From an early age, he would question our modest lifestyle, expressing bewilderment as to why we lacked a motor vehicle, unlike other families. Henry, ever the follower, mirrored his brother's sentiments in all matters. Upon Charles's 18th birthday, Ernest offered him a position at the workshop, an offer met with disdain. "I have no desire to soil my hands as you do, father. I aspire to achieve significant standing," he declared. Those words inflicted a deep wound upon Ernest, though he never voiced his pain to me. I would often observe him in the evenings, seated on the veranda, gazing at the celestial expanse with an expression steeped in melancholy. His son had not merely rejected his profession, but his entire ethos. The years swiftly advanced, and to my astonishment, Charles successfully carved out a niche for himself in the corporate world. He secured employment with a real estate firm in the city. Henry soon followed suit. Both began accumulating considerable wealth, far exceeding anything Ernest and I had ever encountered. Initially, I was filled with immense pride. My sons had attained the success we had only dreamed of, transcending poverty and establishing more prosperous lives. However, gradually, that elation began to wane, replaced by a growing sorrow. Their visits became infrequent, and phone conversations diminished in length. When they did grace us with their presence, they arrived in ostentatious automobiles, attired in expensive suits, their discourse revolving around investments and property ventures. They regarded us with a peculiar blend of pity and shame. "Mother," Charles remarked during one of their infrequent visits, "you and father should relocate to a more suitable environment. This residence is in a state of disrepair." He spoke the truth, yet that dwelling was imbued with all our cherished memories. It was the crucible in which we had raised our sons, the setting for countless shared meals, the place where we had grown old together. It lacked opulence, but it was undeniably our home. Ernest, ever the sage, would gently counsel me, "Margot, prosperity has transformed our boys. We no longer hold sufficient significance in their lives." I resisted this unsettling truth. I persistently rationalized their absences, their brief communiques, their unfulfilled assurances. "They are occupied with building their futures," I would reassure myself. "Someday, they will revert to the loving children we raised." Yet deep within my heart, I knew Ernest was correct. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I was simply unaware of the profound extent to which we had become strangers to them. The most significant transformation occurred when Charles wedded Jasmine Albright, a woman from the city who never concealed her disdain for our unpretentious existence. On her inaugural visit to our home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dusty planks of our porch, and an elegant crimson gown that appeared more valuable than anything I had ever possessed. "A pleasure to meet you," she offered with a strained smile, extending merely the tips of her fingers in greeting. Her gaze swept over our modest abode with an unreadable expression that diminished my sense of self. During the evening meal, Jasmine scarcely touched the fare I had lovingly prepared. She nudged the meatloaf on her plate and dissected minuscule portions of chicken, yet consumed virtually nothing. Charles seemed visibly ill at ease, continuously offering apologies for circumstances he had previously never considered noteworthy. "Perhaps next time we shall dine at an establishment," he whispered to Jasmine, under the assumption that I could not overhear, though his words reached me clearly. Each syllable pierced my heart like a shard of glass. Henry, for his part, remained unmarried, but adopted an equally detached demeanour as his elder brother. His visits were confined to significant occasions, and even then he invariably appeared eager to depart. He remained perpetually engrossed in his mobile device, finalizing transactions even during our conversations. "Mother, I must depart," he would invariably state before our interactions concluded. "I have a crucial appointment early tomorrow." Our communal Sunday gatherings receded into the realm of distant memory. Christmas celebrations became frigid and perfunctory. Our sons would present us with expensive trinkets we did not require. They would remain for a mere 2 or 3 hours before departing with palpable relief. Ernest and I aged in quiet companionship, finding solace in each other. He continued his work at the shop, though his hands no longer possessed their former vigor. I continued my sewing, yet my eyesight had deteriorated. We managed with our modest income, taking pride in our independence from our affluent offspring. "Do you comprehend the most sorrowful aspect, Margot?" Ernest inquired one evening as we sipped coffee on the veranda. "It is not their material wealth, but rather the belief that wealth has instilled in them that we are no longer significant. His insight was, as always, impeccable. My sons had not merely undergone financial metamorphosis, their hearts had also changed. We were no longer their beloved parents. We had become an uncomfortable reminder of a past they wished to obliterate. The situation deteriorated further when Charles acquired a residence valued at $200,000 in an exclusive city enclave. Henry followed suit shortly thereafter, investing in a luxurious condominium priced at $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were proprietors of fortunes that defied our comprehension. You ought to divest this property and relocate to a retirement community, Jasmine suggested during one of her infrequent visits. There are some exceptionally pleasant establishments catering to your age group. You would find it more comfortable. The word community struck me with the force of a physical blow, a retirement community. After 4 decades of building our home, of nurturing these sons with such profound affection, they propose consigning us to an institution. We require no such establishment, Ernest responded with his characteristic dignity. We are content here, within our home. However, I detected a subtle shift in Charles and Henry's expressions. They tacitly endorsed Jasmine's proposal. To them, we represented an encumbrance, a problem to be resolved with maximum convenience. It was at this juncture that the more overt suggestions commenced. Charles arrived one day, documents in hand, arrangements meticulously prepared without our prior consultation. Mother, father, he stated, employing a disingenuous smile he had perfected, I have been contemplating your future. This residence holds a maximum value of $1,000. Should you agree to its sale, I can supplement your funds to facilitate your relocation to a more suitable locale, a better place. For us, no place surpassed the comfort and happiness of the home where we had shared so many decades. Charles, however, failed to grasp this sentiment. In his perception, all matters revolved around numerical calculations and monetary worth. Furthermore, he continued, I believe father should cease his work at the shop. He has attained the age of 70. It is time for repose. Ernest regarded him with an expression of profound sadness. Son, my work is not an arduous task for me. It is the very source of my vitality, the element that imbues my days with purpose. But you could sustain an injury, Henry interjected, supporting his brother's assertion as he consistently did. At your age, an accident would carry significant risk. Their pronouncements carried an ostensibly solicitous tone, yet I perceived an undercurrent of something more, an impatience, an urgency that eluded my full comprehension. The ensuing months were fraught with tension. Our sons intensified their campaign for us to sell the house. They presented real estate agents without prior notification. They commissioned appraisals without our consent. They even began to articulate what they deemed to be the most advantageous course of action for all parties involved. Look, Charles stated during a particularly disconcerting dinner, Jasmine and I are planning to start a family soon. We will require assistance with the expenditures. If you were to sell the house and relocate to a more modest dwelling, those funds could serve as an early inheritance. An early inheritance? He was soliciting our legacy while we were still alive. The sheer audacity of the request rendered me speechless. Ernest remained composed, but I observed a tightening in his jaw. Son, when your mother and I pass on, all that we possess will be yours. However, while we are living, our decisions remain our own. Do not be obstinate, Henry interjected with a severity I had never before witnessed from him. You are advanced in years. You cannot continue to dwell in the past. That evening, after their departure, Ernest and I engaged in conversation until the first light of dawn. For the first time in our marital journey, we contemplated the unsettling possibility that our sons were not the individuals we had raised. Something is amiss, Margot, my husband articulated, his gaze conveying a level of anxiety I had never before observed. This is not mere ambition or impatience. There is a more sinister undercurrent driving this relentless pressure. Little did I realize the profound accuracy of his observation. I could not have conceived that my own sons were orchestrating a scheme that would irrevocably alter the fabric of our existence. I was oblivious to the fact that the impending tragedy would not be a capricious turn of fate, but a meticulously planned conspiracy devised by the two individuals I held in the highest regard. The final ordinary conversation I shared with Charles occurred 3 weeks prior to Ernest's passing. He arrived unaccompanied by Jasmine, his demeanor unusually grave. Mother, he stated, settling at the kitchen table where he had consumed countless breakfasts as a boy. I want you to know that irrespective of what may transpire, Henry and I will always ensure your well-being. His words offered me comfort at the time, but recalling them now, beside Ernest's gravesite, they elicit a disquieting tremor. Why did he utter the phrase irrespective of what may transpire? What foreknowledge did he possess that I lacked? The calamitous incident that reshaped our lives unfolded on a Tuesday morning. Ernest had departed early for his workshop, a routine he had observed for over 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his preferred midday meal of meatloaf and mashed potatoes when the telephone rang with an alarming urgency that sent a prickle of apprehension down my spine. "Mrs. Hayes?" A voice I did not recognize inquired. "I am calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been involved in a severe accident. You must come without delay." The words seemed to dissolve into the water, blurring my comprehension. The world around me ceased to exist. My legs felt as though they had lost all substance, and I had to grasp the doorframe to prevent myself from collapsing. What occurred? Is he well? Is he alive? Is he in intensive care? "Ma'am, please proceed to the hospital as expeditiously as possible." The journey to the hospital was a disorienting nightmare. My neighbor Doris had to drive me, as my trembling rendered me incapable of even grasping the ignition key. The entire duration of the drive, my mind steadfastly refused to process the unfolding events. Ernest was known for his meticulousness and caution in his work. How could such a catastrophe have transpired? Upon our arrival at the hospital, Charles and Henry were already present. Their immediate presence surprised me, as I had not yet been formally notified. However, in my state of distress, I did not dwell on this discrepancy. "Mother," Charles declared, embracing me with a force that appeared genuinely heartfelt, "Father is in critical condition. The physicians indicate that a piece of machinery at the workshop malfunctioned and exploded. He has sustained severe burns and a significant traumatic brain injury." Henry's eyes were red, yet an unsettling quality in his expression suggested something amiss. He appeared more anxious than sorrowful, akin to someone awaiting significant news, rather than experiencing profound grief over his father's plight. "May we see him?" I implored, my voice laced with desperation. "Only immediate family, one at a time and for a maximum of 5 minutes," the nurse explained. As I entered the intensive care unit, my heart plummeted. Ernest was connected to a multitude of medical devices, his face and limbs swathed in bandages. I could barely recognize him. His respiration was shallow and artificially maintained by the persistent beeping of machines. I approached his bedside and gently took his hand, the sole portion of his body that appeared unmarred. "Ernest, my dearest, I am here. Everything will be well. You will recover just as you always have." For a fleeting moment, I felt a subtle pressure in my hand. His eyelids twitched beneath their coverings. He was fighting. My warrior was striving to return to me. The subsequent 3 days were the most arduous of my life. I essentially resided at the hospital, finding brief moments of rest in the uncomfortable chairs of the waiting area. Charles and Henry alternated in accompanying me, but their focus consistently shifted towards engaging with the medical staff rather than offering solace to their father. I overheard disjointed conversations that at the time I could not fully comprehend. Henry inquired about medical insurance and the projected cost of treatment. Charles, meanwhile, was engaged in conversations pertaining to life insurance policies and designated beneficiaries. Mother, Charles informed me on the second day, we have reviewed father's insurance particulars. He holds a life insurance policy with a payout of $50,000. Additionally, there is a workers' compensation policy that could yield an additional $75,000. Why was he discussing financial matters when Ernest was engaged in a desperate struggle for his life? Why was his concern centered on insurance rather than his father's recovery? The money is of no consequence to me, I retorted sharply. My sole desire is for your father's recovery. Of course, Mother, he replied, but I detected an unnerving glint in his eyes, a disquieting coldness, a computational process occurring while his father lay on the precipice of death. On the third day, the medical professionals delivered the most devastating news of my existence. Dr. Patterson, a man of advanced years with an empathetic demeanor, convened us in a small private office. Mrs. Hayes, he began softly, your husband's condition has become critical. The burns have developed infection, and the head trauma is more severe than our initial assessment indicated. We must approach this with realistic expectations. What precisely does that entail? I inquired, though my heart already harbinger the dire answer. It means we must prepare for the most unfavorable outcome. Your husband is currently in an induced coma. We can sustain his life indefinitely, but his quality of life, it is highly improbable that he will ever regain consciousness. My entire world shattered around me. 42 years of marriage, an entire lifetime meticulously constructed together. And now I was being informed that it was all dissipating like smoke. We wish to exhaust every possible avenue, I pleaded, my voice choked with sobs, regardless of the expense, regardless of the duration. However, Charles exchanged a significant glance with Henry that deeply unsettled me. Mother, Charles stated, his voice attempting a semblance of understanding, we must be pragmatic. Father would not wish to endure such an existence. He frequently expressed that he never wanted to be a burden to anyone. A burden. A surge of fury, unlike any I had previously experienced, erupted within me. He is your father. He is not a burden. He is the man who raised you, who dedicated his life's work to providing you with the very best he could. We understand, Mother, Henry chimed in, but we must also consider your circumstances. The medical expenses will be astronomical. They could deplete all your savings. Once more, financial considerations. Money, always money. My husband was dying and they were engaged in cost assessment. That night, alone in the hospital room, I clasped Ernest's hand and spoke to him as if he could perceive my words. My love, I am unsure of what to do. The physicians offer no hope, yet I cannot bring myself to let you go. I cannot envision my life without you. It was at this juncture that an event occurred that continues to send chills down my spine. His fingers moved infinitesimally, exerting a pressure almost imperceptible. His lips parted as if attempting to form words, yet no sound emerged. I summoned the nurses, my voice filled with desperation. He is responding, he is attempting to communicate. But by the time they arrived, Ernest had reverted to his previous state. The nurse meticulously examined the monitors and shook her head. At times there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It does not necessarily indicate consciousness. Yet I knew what I had experienced. Ernest had endeavored to convey something to me. He had fought to impart crucial information. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, The medical equipment began to emit alarm signals. Lights flashed erratically. Nurses rushed towards Ernest's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the cacophony awakened me. "No, no, no!" I cried out, sprinting towards the room. The medical team laboured for 40 minutes in an attempt to resuscitate him, but their efforts proved futile. At precisely 4:37 in the morning, Ernest was officially pronounced deceased. The agony I experienced at that moment was profoundly physical, as if my very heart had been violently torn from my chest. I collapsed beside his bed, embracing his still warm form, utterly incapable of accepting his permanent departure. Charles and Henry arrived at the hospital approximately 1 hour after their father's demise. They appeared remarkably prepared, as if anticipating the notification. They carried documents, papers, and contact information for funeral service providers. "We have already made arrangements with the Spring Creek Funeral Home," Charles informed me, his words delivered while I was still engulfed in inconsolable grief. "They can collect the body this morning. We have also contacted the insurance providers." Henry added, "The claim process is currently in motion." How could they exhibit such efficiency, such meticulous organization, such chilling detachment mere moments after the loss of their father? Something was undeniably amiss. However, my sorrow was so overwhelming that clear, rational thought eluded me. The funeral was scheduled for the subsequent Monday. Charles undertook all the arrangements, largely bypassing any consultation with me. He selected the most basic casket and opted for the briefest service, as if driven by an intense desire to conclude the proceedings as swiftly as possible. "This is precisely what Father would have desired," he stated when I expressed my dissatisfaction at being excluded from the decision-making process. Something simple without undue fanfare. Yet Ernest merited far more than this unseemly haste to inter him and subsequently forget. The day of the funeral dawned, overcast and frigid, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for Ernest. I wore my solitary black dress, the same attire I had donned for my mother's funeral years prior. My hands trembled so violently that Doris had to assist me with the minute buttons adorning the back of the garment. "Remain strong, Margot," my dear friend whispered as she meticulously brushed my hair. "Ernest would wish to see you resolute." But I felt no strength. I felt an absolute void, as if my very soul had been extracted. 42 years of marriage cannot be so easily interred. Every object within the house served as a poignant reminder of him. His coffee mug resting on the table, his tools positioned on the porch, his pillow still retaining the faint scent of his presence. Upon our arrival at the cemetery, I was taken aback by the remarkably small number of attendees. I had anticipated the presence of more of Ernest's colleagues from the workshop, additional neighbours, and a greater number of acquaintances. Instead, it was solely Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, myself, and the officiating pastor. For a man who had resided in the same community for 70 years and had extended assistance to countless individuals, the funeral appeared conspicuously sparse. "Where are the gentlemen from the shop?" I inquired of Charles. "We did not wish to impose upon their time," he responded curtly. Father was a private individual. He would have preferred an intimate ceremony. This assertion was patently false. Ernest cherished his community and genuinely cared for his neighbours. He would have desired them to attend and bid him farewell. Why had Charles elected to conduct matters with such clandestine haste and secrecy? Throughout the service, I observed my sons with a peculiar sense of emotional detachment. Charles maintained a solemn countenance, appropriate for the solemnity of the occasion, yet his gaze repeatedly drifted towards his wristwatch. Henry appeared restive, as if preoccupied with matters of greater import. Jasmine discreetly checked her mobile device beneath the shroud of her black veil. They bid their father farewell, a rushed, distracted goodbye. The minister spoke of everlasting life, of peace well earned, of returning to the divine. His words were but empty sounds to my devastated heart. I didn't wish for Ernest to find rest. I yearned for him to walk through the door with me, for our days to continue unfolding together, for our evenings to still be filled with coffee on the porch. When the time came to enter the casket, my knees buckled. Doris had to brace me as I wept uncontrollably. The thud of soil against wood echoed with a chilling finality, a pronouncement of utter despair. It was in that precise moment, standing beside my husband's grave, that my phone buzzed, an unknown number. The message read, "I am alive. That is not me in the casket." My heart seized. The words blurred before my eyes as if I were experiencing a hallucination, a descent into madness brought on by grief. With hands that trembled uncontrollably, I typed back, "Who are you?" The reply was instantaneous. "I cannot say. They are watching. Do not trust our sons." The phone slipped from my grasp as if it were searing hot. Doris started to stoop, but I intercepted her. I couldn't allow anyone else to see those words, not until I understood. "Are you all right, Mother?" Charles inquired, his brow furrowed with concern. I met his gaze, searching for any flicker of truth. His eyes appeared sincere, yet every movement, every utterance, every expression now seemed suspect. "I'm fine," I lied, tucking the phone into my purse. "I simply need to return home." On the drive back, the messages replayed endlessly in my mind. Could this be a cruel jest at the most agonizing point of my life? Or was there a genuine possibility that Ernest was still alive? If so, then who had we laid to rest? And if he was deceased, who possessed enough intimate knowledge of our lives to craft such a pointed message regarding our sons? That evening, alone in my house, which now felt like a mausoleum, I meticulously reviewed the events of the past few days. Ernest's accident had seemed peculiar from the outset. According to Charles, a machine had malfunctioned spectacularly at the workshop, but Ernest knew that place intimately, down to its very last bolt and wire. He was fastidious about maintenance, bordering on obsessive when it came to safety protocols. Furthermore, how had my sons arrived at the hospital so swiftly if no one had alerted them? I was designated as the emergency contact, and the hospital had contacted me first. How did they receive news of the incident before I did? And then there was the matter of the finances. From the very beginning, Charles and Henry had spoken of insurance policies and beneficiaries as if they had been anticipating this very moment, meticulously preparing for it. I resolved to examine Ernest's personal effects. In his old wooden desk, he kept all his vital documents secured within a metal container. Insurance policies, the deed to our home, workshop records, everything was housed there. I discovered the $50,000 life insurance policy that Charles had alluded to. However, there was something I hadn't recalled. The policy had undergone an amendment just 6 months prior, elevating the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why would Ernest have increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned such a change to me, and more significantly, who had prompted him to do so? Continuing my search, I unearthed something even more unsettling. A workers' compensation policy, of which I was entirely unaware, had been purchased a mere 2 months before his passing. It provided $5,000 in the event of accidental demise on the job. That brought the total to $15,000, a considerable sum for a family like ours, but also a sum substantial enough to tempt someone devoid of scruples. My phone vibrated once more, another dispatch from the same anonymous sender. "Check the bank account. See who has been moving money." This time I did not hesitate. This individual, whoever they might be, possessed too much insight to be merely a prankster. They were aware of the insurance details. They knew about my sons. They had access to information that only someone intimately connected to us could possibly possess. The following day, I made my way to the bank, where Ernest and I had maintained our account for 30 years. Mrs. Thompson, the branch manager who had known us since time immemorial, offered her sincerest condolences. "Margot, I am so deeply sorry about Ernest. He was a truly good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I've come to review our accounts. I need to get a clear picture of our financial standing." She presented the bank statements covering the past 6 months. What I witnessed sent a chill through me. Over the preceding 3 months, substantial sums had been withdrawn from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March, funds that I had no knowledge of being transferred. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" I inquired, my voice laced with apprehension. "Your husband made them in person," Mrs. Thompson explained. "He mentioned needing the funds for workshop repairs. However, I manage the household accounts. I know precisely how much we had and our expenditures." Ernest had never mentioned any costly repairs at the workshop, and we had certainly never discussed parting with thousands of dollars from our savings. "Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals?" I asked. She produced the receipts. Indeed, the signatures bore a resemblance to Ernest's, yet something about the penmanship seemed amiss. It appeared too hesitant, too uncertain for his typically decisive and clear script. "Mrs. Thompson," I asked, my heart pounding, "did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone accompanying him?" She paused in thought. "Now that you mention it, I believe he came in with one of your sons on 1 or 2 occasions. Charles, I think he said he was assisting his father with the paperwork because Ernest was having difficulty reading documents without his spectacles." "Charles." My son had been involved in financial transactions that were unknown to me, using his father's supposed frailty as a pretext. However, Ernest's eyesight was perfectly fine with his glasses, which he rarely removed during daylight hours. That afternoon, as I pored over the bank receipts repeatedly, another message arrived. The insurance was their idea. They persuaded Ernest that you needed more protection. It was a trap. I could no longer dismiss the mounting evidence before me. The inexplicably increased insurance policies, the unauthorized financial disbursements, Charles's involvement in transactions I knew nothing about, his suspiciously efficient handling of the funeral arrangements, his surprising lack of emotion during his father's final moments. But the question that truly terrified me was whether they had indeed orchestrated Ernest's demise, how they had accomplished it, and who was sending me these cryptic messages. How did this individual possess such intimate knowledge of unfolding events? The ensuing days became a torment of uncertainty and suspicion. Every smile from Charles, every embrace from Henry, every word of sympathy felt like a carefully constructed facade, concealing something sinister. Yet I required more concrete proof before I could accept a truth as horrific as the one beginning to form in my mind. My phone continued to receive dispatches from the mysterious number. "Go to Ernest's workshop. Look in his desk. There are things you overlooked." I decided to visit the workshop for the first time since the accident. Charles had stated that a machine had exploded, but upon arriving, I encountered a scene vastly different from my expectations. The workshop was unnervingly clean, far too pristine to have been the site of an explosion. There were no scorch marks on the walls, no scattered debris, no indication of the devastation that such a severe incident would have surely caused. "Where is the machine that exploded?" I asked aloud. I scoured the entire workshop, finding every piece of equipment in its rightful place, functioning flawlessly. The welding equipment, the air compressor, the electric saw, all were undamaged. What then had led to the accident? Within Ernest's desk, I discovered something that sent a shiver down my spine, a handwritten note dated 3 days prior to his passing. Charles insists I acquire additional insurance. He claims it's for Margot. However, something feels amiss. I do not trust his motivations. Beneath that note was another. Henry brought me some documents to sign. He says they are for modernizing the workshop, but I do not grasp the nature of it. Why all the haste? My husband had harbored suspicions. He had sensed the malevolent intentions of our sons, but he had perished before he could confide in me. I continued my search and found an envelope bearing my name. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was a letter from Ernest. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it signifies that something has befallen me. In recent months, I have observed unsettling shifts in Charles and Henry. Their preoccupation with our finances, with the insurance, with the prospect of selling the house. Jasmine is exerting considerable influence over them. Yesterday, Charles remarked that I should be more mindful of my personal safety, as at my age, any mishap could prove fatal. I cannot articulate why, but those words carried the weight of a premonition. I love you, Margot. Should anything happen to me, do not place your trust in anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter slipped from my grasp. Ernest had sensed his own impending doom. He had perceived the warning signs that I, blinded by maternal affection, had overlooked. That evening Charles paid me a visit. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now appeared utterly disingenuous. "Mum, I've been contemplating your future," he stated, pouring himself a glass without inquiring if I desired one. "The insurance payout, it's already being processed. It will be $15,000. "How do you know the precise amount?" I inquired, feigning ignorance. "Well, I assisted Dad with the insurance paperwork. He wanted to ensure you would have sufficient funds to live comfortably." A fabrication. Ernest had never expressed a desire to increase the insurance. According to his own written words, he had been subjected to pressure by Charles. "And what do you suggest I do with that money?" I asked, closely observing his reaction. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "You could purchase a smaller, more intimate dwelling, or even better, relocate to a pleasant retirement community where you would have companionship and medical attention. Henry and I could oversee your finances to maximize their yield." "Oversee my finances? We simply wish to care for you, Mother. At your age, it's easy to fall prey to scams or make poor financial choices. We understand investments, business acumen. We could triple that amount within a few years. Triple my inheritance or funnel it into their own coffers." "Allow me some time to consider," I said, attempting to stall. "Of course," Jasmine chimed in, her sweetness a thinly veiled pretense. "But not for too long. It's for your own well-being." After they departed, I sat in my kitchen, my body racked with a mixture of fury and dread. My own sons, my own flesh and blood, had not only orchestrated the demise of their father, but were now plotting to pilfer all that remained to me. That night, my phone vibrated with a message lengthier than the preceding ones. "Tomorrow, proceed to the police station. Request the report concerning Ernest's accident. There are discrepancies you need to be aware of." The following day, I made my way to the local police precinct. Sergeant O'Connell, who had known Ernest for many years, greeted me with kindness. "The report regarding your husband's accident?" he inquired, a perplexed expression on his face. "What accident, Mrs. Hayes?" "From his workshop, when the machine exploded." The sergeant consulted his files and shook his head. "We have no record of an explosion at Ernest's workshop. In fact, we have no record of any work-related accident involving your husband." A wave of dizziness washed over me. But my son said it was an accident at the workshop. That's why he was in the hospital." "Mrs. Hayes, your husband was admitted to the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not as a result of a work accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms indicative of poisoning. Poisoning. The attending physicians had detected traces of methanol in his bloodstream, a quantity sufficient to induce blindness, brain damage, and ultimately death. The hospital should have informed you of this poisoning. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a workplace incident. Someone had deliberately poisoned my husband. Why was I not informed of this? I asked, my voice cracking. The immediate family who signed the hospital release forms requested that the information be kept confidential to prevent unnecessary speculation. They stated, "You are too emotionally fragile to process the technical details." The immediate family. Charles and Henry had concealed the true cause of Ernest's affliction, fabricated the narrative of the explosion, and manipulated everyone, myself included, to cover up a murder. "Mrs. Hayes," the sergeant continued, "if you have reason to suspect the circumstances surrounding your husband's death, we can initiate a formal investigation." I had more than suspicions. I was absolutely convinced that my own sons had murdered their father for financial gain. That afternoon, Henry arrived at my residence, bearing a bouquet of flowers and the same disingenuous smile as Charles. "How are you, Mother? You appear fatigued." "I'm well," I lied, scrutinizing his every movement through a new lens. "I'm simply contemplating the future." "That's commendable. Charles and I have been discussing it. We believe you should sell the house relatively soon while it's still on the market." "Why the haste?" "Well, older residences tend to depreciate quickly, and you'll require liquidity. Funeral expenses, outstanding medical bills, more falsehoods." The funeral had been remarkably inexpensive, almost insultingly so, and there were no outstanding medical bills, as the hospital insurance had covered them. "Henry," I said, meeting his gaze directly, "you knew your father did not succumb to a work-related accident?" For a fleeting instant I detected a flicker of alarm in his eyes, but he quickly regained his composure. "What are you implying, Mother?" "I visited the police station. There is no report of an explosion at your father's workshop." This time the panic was far more palpable. "Mother, you shouldn't be doing such things. They will only confuse you. The grief is overwhelming you." "The grief is overwhelming me, or have you been deceiving me?" He stood abruptly, jostling the coffee I had poured for him. "I believe you need to rest. We can speak further when you are calmer." He exited with haste, but not before making a phone call from the porch, though the urgency and distress in his tone were evident even without audible words. That night I received the most illuminating message yet. "They are coming together tomorrow. They will attempt to persuade you that you are losing your mind, that grief is causing you to imagine things. Do not believe them, and do not consume anything they offer you to eat or drink." The prediction from the mysterious messages materialized precisely as foretold. The subsequent day, Charles and Henry arrived at my home in tandem, accompanied by Jasmine. Their faces wore expressions of exaggerated concern, and they carried a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. "Mother, we are terribly worried about you," Charles began, his voice dripping with an artificial sweetness. "The neighbors have informed us that you have been exhibiting peculiar behavior. Doris mentioned you have been speaking to yourself, that you are not eating properly." Doris had never uttered such words. It was merely another fabrication in their ever-expanding repertoire of deceit. "Jasmine brought your favorite pastries," Henry added, gesturing to the bag. "And we've prepared special coffee from that brand you favor so much." I recalled the precise words of the message. "Do not consume anything they offer you to eat or drink." It was entirely plausible they intended to poison me as well, just as they had Ernest. "Thank you, but I've already had breakfast," I replied, maintaining a cautious distance. "But Mother," Jasmine insisted, her smile failing to reach her eyes, You need to nourish yourself properly. You have lost a significant amount of weight since Father Ernest passed. I am fine, I reiterated firmly. Charles exchanged a significant glance with Henry. It was the same look they had shared at the hospital when the physician delivered Ernest's grim prognosis. Mother, Charles stated, moving closer to me, we need to discuss something of great importance. Henry and I have consulted with some medical professionals regarding your recent conduct. My conduct? Yes, the peculiar questions you have been posing, your visits to the police department, this fixation on trivial details about Dad. It is understandable after such a profound loss, but it can become detrimental if left unaddressed. Henry nodded gravely. We spoke with Dr. Albright. He mentioned that it is common for individuals in their later years to develop paranoia following the loss of a partner, particularly women of your age. Paranoia, they were accusing me of being deranged for uncovering their deception. I am not paranoid, I declared, summoning all the strength I could muster. I am merely inquiring about matters that I should have addressed from the outset. What matters? Charles challenged, such as why there is no police report for your father's supposed accident, why the workshop is immaculately clean if an explosion occurred, why you withdrew $5,000 from our account without informing me. The ensuing silence was deafening. The three exchanged looks of barely concealed panic. Mother, Henry finally said, those matters have straightforward explanations. Dad withdrew that money for renovations he intended to undertake secretly as a surprise for you. What surprise? He wished to remodel the house, Charles interjected. He had hired some workmen to repair the roof and repaint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday. If that were the case, where were the workmen? Where were the construction materials? Why was no one in town aware of this supposed remodeling project? And regarding the police report, Charles continued, not all workplace accidents necessitate a report, particularly when they occur on private property. More lies. Sergeant O'Connell had been exceedingly clear. Any workplace incident resulting in serious injury required an official report. Mother, Jasmine intervened, her tone saccharine yet condescending. We simply wish to ensure your well-being. That is precisely why we believe it would be most beneficial for you to relocate to a facility offering specialized medical care. A residential home, a specialized care facility, Charles corrected, for individuals experiencing complicated grief. They provide psychologists, nurses, and activities to occupy your time. And in the interim, Henry added, we can manage the sale of the house, handle the insurance proceeds, all those complex matters that you shouldn't be burdened with in your current state. There it was, the complete scheme. Declare me mentally incapacitated, confine me to a home, and seize control of all my assets. First, they had murdered Ernest for the insurance payout, and now they intended to defraud me as well. And what if I refuse? I inquired. Why would you refuse? Charles asked, his smile sending a shiver down my spine. We only desire what is best for you, because this is my home. This is where I built my life alongside Ernest. This is where I raised you. Mother, Henry sighed with feigned exasperation. You cannot dwell in the past indefinitely. Dad is gone, you must accept it and move forward. I have accepted it, but that does not imply I intend to relinquish my life and my fortune. The veneer of concern began to fracture on my sons' faces. Charles stood abruptly. Very well. If you refuse to heed reason, we will be compelled to take more decisive action. What does that entail? It means we can initiate legal proceedings to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have testimonials from medical professionals who corroborate your suffering from senile paranoia. Medical professionals? What medical professionals? I had not consulted any doctors regarding my mental state. Doctor Albright has already signed a preliminary report, Henry stated. He indicates that based on our descriptions of your conduct, it is highly probable that you require specialized care. A doctor who had never examined me had issued a report on my mental state based solely on my son's accounts. How much had they paid to procure such a fraudulent assessment? Therefore, you can cooperate voluntarily, Charles continued, or we can pursue it legally. But either way, you will receive the necessary assistance. It was a blatant threat. If I did not surrender my assets willingly, they would exploit the legal system to seize them. I require time to contemplate, I told them, attempting to buy myself precious moments. Of course, Jasmine replied with her insincere sweetness, but not excessively prolonged, for your own benefit. After they departed, I sat in my kitchen, my entire being trembling with a potent mixture of rage and apprehension. My own sons, the very blood flowing through my veins, had not only murdered their father, but were now actively plotting to abscond with everything I possessed. That night, my phone vibrated with a message that proved more revealing than any before it. Margot, this is Stephen Callahan, a private investigator. Ernest engaged my services 3 weeks prior to his death, as he harbored suspicions regarding Charles and Henry. They poisoned him with methanol, which they administered in his morning coffee. I possess audio recordings of their conversations detailing their entire plot. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, proceed to the corner cafe. Occupy the table at the rear. Communicate solely via text. No instructions or commentary. I will be there. Finally, I would discover the identity of the sender of those messages, and, more importantly, I would possess the conclusive evidence necessary to seek justice for my husband's demise. However, I was acutely aware that my time was limited. Charles and Henry had revealed their intentions. If I did not act swiftly, I would find myself confined while they squandered the fortune that had cost Ernest his very existence. The conflict had commenced, and even though I was a 66-year-old woman facing 2 ruthless men, I possessed something they lacked, the truth. And the truth, sooner or later, always surfaces. That night, for the first time since Ernest's passing, a smile graced my lips, for I knew my husband's death would not be in vain. His prudence, his intuition, his decision to engage a private investigator would empower me to attain justice. Charles and Henry had profoundly underestimated their own mother. They were on the precipice of discovering that a woman championing the memory of her murdered spouse represents a force far more formidable than all their avarice combined. The subsequent day dawned imbued with a palpable sense of apprehension and eager expectation. I meticulously selected my attire, opting for my most dignified violet ensemble, reserved for significant occasions. If I were to rendezvous with the individual who held the answers I desperately sought, I intended to be fully prepared for whatever revelations might unfold. Precisely at 2:30 in the afternoon, I proceeded towards the designated corner cafe, my gait purposeful yet cautious. Every discernible shadow appeared suspect. Every pedestrian on the thoroughfare could be an operative dispatched by my sons. The very paranoia they had attributed to me was beginning to feel alarmingly valid. The cafe was moderately frequented. As per my instructions, I made my way directly to a table at the rear. I requested a chamomile tea and commenced my wait, my hands exhibiting a slight tremor as they rested upon the well-worn wooden surface. Precisely at 3 o'clock, a gentleman in his early 50s approached my table. He was of considerable height, with silvering hair, intelligent eyes, and an expression that was both serious and gentle. He carried a brown file beneath his arm. "Mrs. Hayes?" he inquired in a hushed tone. I offered a nod, my voice momentarily failing me. I am Stephen Callahan. I offer my sincerest condolences for your loss. Ernest was a commendable man. He took a seat opposite me, placing the folder on the table. Before I present what I have, he continued, I must impress upon you that the information you are about to receive and witness will be profoundly distressing. Are you prepared? I have been preparing myself since I received your initial correspondence. I responded with a fortitude I had not realized I possessed. Stephen opened the folder and retrieved a small voice recorder. Ernest visited me approximately 1 month ago. He expressed significant concern regarding his son's conduct. He retained my services to investigate them discreetly. He pressed the playback button. Ernest's voice, so achingly familiar and cherished, filled the confined space between us. Stephen, I need you to understand that if anything untoward befalls me, it will not be an accident. Charles and Henry have been exerting pressure on me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Charles presented me with documents, purportedly to offer greater protection for Margot. However, upon review, I discovered clauses that directly benefited them. My heart accelerated its rhythm. Hearing Ernest's voice was akin to his brief return, yet his words validated my most deeply held fears. The recording continued. Henry has been posing peculiar inquiries about my daily habits, my dietary preferences for breakfast, the timing of my departures from home, and whether Margot accompanies me to the establishment. He claims it stems from solicitude, but there is an unsettling quality to his questioning that troubles me. Stephen paused the recording. This conversation transpired 3 weeks prior to his passing, but I possess more recent evidence. He initiated another recording, this time featuring Charles's voice in the background, engaged in a telephone conversation. No, we cannot prolong this any further. The old man is becoming suspicious. Yesterday, he questioned my intense interest in his insurance. Yes, I have already procured the methanol. It functions flawlessly, as the symptoms closely mimic those of a cardiac arrest or a stroke. No, Mother will not pose an obstacle. Following Father's demise, she will be so utterly despondent that we can do as we please with her. Tears began to stream down my cheeks. It was the voice of my son, my very own son, callously orchestrating his father's murder. There is more, Stephen stated softly. This recording is from the day preceding Ernest's death. A new recording commenced. This instance features Henry conversing with an individual. All arrangements are finalized. Tomorrow, Charles will administer the methanol in Father's coffee. We informed him it was a specialized vitamin supplement recommended by a physician. The imbecile will ingest it without the slightest suspicion. The symptoms will commence with dizziness and confusion, followed by a loss of vision, convulsions, and ultimately a coma. The medical professionals will attribute it to a stroke or a heart attack. By the time they ascertain it was a poisoning, it will be too late. My world imploded. Not only had they meticulously planned Ernest's assassination, but they had executed it with a chilling callousness that instilled profound terror within me. How was it conceivable that my sons, the infants I had nurtured, the boys I had soothed through their childhood terrors, could be capable of such monstrous depravity? How did you obtain these recordings? I inquired through my sobs. Ernest had requested that I place listening devices within your residence, Stephen explained. He harbored apprehension, though he was uncertain of the precise nature of the threat. We positioned them on the landline telephone and in several other strategic locations. He withdrew a series of photographs from the folder. I also have this. Charles purchasing methanol at a hardware store approximately 30 meters from town. He paid in cash and utilized a false name, but I have video evidence. The photographs unequivocally depicted Charles exiting a hardware establishment, a small bottle clutched in his hand. The date imprinted on the images was 5 days before Ernest's death. And this, Stephen continued, presenting further documentation. These are the financial statements for Charles and Henry covering the past 6 months. They have been expending considerably more funds than their incomes would logically support. Charles is indebted to a local moneylender for $70,000. Henry carries gambling debts amounting to $40,000. They were in a state of desperation. Everything began to coalesce. It was not merely avarice that had fueled Ernest's murder, it was financial desperation. My sons were financially ruined and perceived their father as a convenient source of rapid, illicit funds. Why did you not approach the authorities immediately following Ernest's passing? I implored him. Because Charles and Henry are exceptionally cunning, they bribed the physician who attended to Ernest at the hospital to alter the official cause of death. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate erroneously states heart failure due to complications arising from a workplace accident. Without that crucial medical corroboration, my recordings might have proven insufficient for a conviction, I stated, experiencing a complex blend of sorrow and unwavering resolve. Precisely, and there is one further critical detail you must be apprised of. A chill coursed through my veins. What is it? Your sons were also contemplating your demise. Stephen played one final recording, this time featuring the voices of both Charles and Henry. Once we secure Dad's insurance payout, we must also eliminate Mom, Charles stated. We cannot afford to have her become suspicious or for anyone else to plant ideas in her mind. How so? Henry inquired. The same method as with Dad. This time, however, we can present it as a suicide attributed to depression. A widow unable to persevere without her husband. No one will question it. The entirety of the estate, encompassing the house, the savings, and the insurance proceeds, totaling nearly $200,000, will be ours. The recording concluded. I was trembling uncontrollably. My sons had not only orchestrated their father's murder, but were also actively plotting my own assassination, all for the pursuit of monetary gain. Please, Mrs. Hayes, Stephen said gently, I understand this is a devastating revelation, but we have amassed sufficient evidence to hold them accountable for their heinous actions. What is our next course of action? I inquired, dabbing at my eyes. Firstly, we must proceed to the police station with all this compelling evidence. Sergeant O'Connell is an honourable individual, untainted by corruption. Secondly, we must act with utmost haste. Your sons are planning to have you legally declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. If they succeed, it will significantly impede our legal recourse. Indeed, I intercepted a telephone conversation this very morning. They are scheduled to meet with Judge Miller at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to initiate the process of mental incapacitation. I rose from the table, propelled by a determination I had not experienced in weeks. Then we must take action tonight. Precisely, Stephen confirmed. But first, there is one additional piece of information I wish to impart. He extracted a final photograph from the folder. In it, Ernest was observed exiting a medical clinic I did not recognize. 3 days prior to his passing, your husband underwent a comprehensive medical examination at a clinic within the city. The results indicate that he was in perfect health. There were no discernible signs of cardiac disease. His blood pressure was within normal parameters. Everything was optimal. This conclusively demonstrates that his death was a consequence of poisoning, not a result of pre-existing health complications. That was the definitive piece of corroboration we required. Ernest had been a man of robust health, cruelly murdered by his own progeny. Stephen, I said, taking his hand, thank you for honouring the promise you made to my husband. Now, let us secure justice. That very evening, Stephen and I proceeded directly to the police precinct. Sergeant O'Connell was on duty that particular week, which proved advantageous for our objectives. Upon our arrival, it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and the station was remarkably tranquil. Sergeant O'Connell, I stated with unwavering resolve, I need to file a formal complaint concerning the homicide of my husband, Ernest. The sergeant regarded me with evident surprise. Homicide? Mrs. Hayes? The death certificate indicates he succumbed to cardiac complications following a workplace accident. The death certificate is fraudulent, I countered, placing Stephen's file upon his desk. My husband was deliberately poisoned with methanol by our own sons. For the subsequent 2 hours, Stephen and I meticulously presented all the collected evidence, the audio recordings, the photographic evidence of Charles procuring methanol, the financial documents detailing unauthorized expenditures, Ernest's medical reports substantiating his excellent health, and finally, the recorded conversations in which my sons confessed to both their father's murder and their subsequent plot against my life. Sergeant O'Connell listened to each recording, his expression growing progressively more somber. Upon our conclusion, he leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. This is monstrous, he murmured. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed with this, Mrs. Hayes? Once we apprehend your sons, there is no recourse for reversal. Sergeant, I replied, summoning every vestige of my dignity, those individuals murdered my husband in cold blood for financial gain. They were furthermore planning to end my life. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must face the consequences of their transgressions. We will require the medical examiner to exhume Ernest's body to confirm the presence of methanol, the sergeant explained. Are you prepared for that procedure? Undertake whatever is necessary, I responded without hesitation. Sergeant O'Connell promptly contacted the district attorney. Despite the advanced hour, the gravity of the case compelled the DA to present himself at the station personally. Following a thorough review of all presented evidence, he immediately authorized the issuance of arrest warrants for both Charles and Henry. We shall commence proceedings at dawn, the DA informed us. It is imperative that we secure all remaining evidence before they have the opportunity to destroy any further proof. Stephen accompanied me back to my residence that night. Are you certain you will be safe alone? He inquired with palpable concern. I will be perfectly fine, I assured him. Having uncovered the truth, my apprehension has dissolved. Justice is now on my side. Sleep eluded me that night. I remained seated in my kitchen, gazing at the framed photographs of Ernest adorning the walls. For the first time since his untimely demise, my emotions were not solely dominated by sorrow. A peculiar amalgam of sadness and profound satisfaction permeated me. Knowing that retribution for his murder was imminent, at 6 o'clock in the morning my telephone rang. It was Charles. Mom, you must come to Henry's residence immediately. Something dreadful has occurred. What has transpired? I inquired, feigning concern. It would be best if I explained this in person. Please make haste. I recognized it as a ruse. Having listened to the recordings the previous evening, I understood they intended to accelerate their plan to eliminate me. Nevertheless, I was also aware that the police were already en route to apprehend them. I am en route, I lied. Instead of proceeding to Henry's house, I remained in my kitchen in vigilant anticipation. At 7:30 in the morning, I observed from my window as multiple police vehicles, converging from various directions, made their way towards my sons' respective residences. My telephone rang incessantly throughout the ensuing hour. First Charles, then Henry, their voices progressively more desperate, imploring my whereabouts, yet I abstained from answering any of their calls. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Sergeant O'Connell rapped on my door. Mrs. Hayes, we have apprehended Charles and Henry. They are currently in police custody. facing charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. My legs felt unsteady, but this time it was not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of relief. How did they react? I inquired. Charles initially denied all involvement, but upon presenting the recordings, he became utterly distraught. Henry attempted to evade capture by exiting through a rear window of his residence. We were compelled to pursue him for 6 blocks. That afternoon, Jasmine arrived to visit me. She appeared tearful and pleading, a stark contrast to the cold, calculating demeanor I had previously encountered. "Mrs. Hayes, I implore you, you must withdraw the charges against Charles. He is not inherently wicked. He was simply driven by desperation due to his financial obligations. This is also my culpability." I regarded her without a flicker of empathy. "Jasmine, your husband poisoned my husband. He was also intent on murdering me. There exists no justification or excuse for such depravity." "But we are family," she cried out in her despair. "Consider the ramifications this will have on our lineage." "The lineage ceased to exist the moment you resolved to assassinate Ernest for financial gain," I responded with chilling finality. "Now I must ask you to depart my residence." 3 days later, the exhumation of Ernest's body was conducted. The laboratory analysis confirmed precisely what Stephen had discovered: lethal concentrations of methanol within his system, sufficient to induce all the symptoms he exhibited prior to his demise. The case garnered widespread notoriety throughout the town. No one could comprehend how 2 sons could have orchestrated the murder of their own father for monetary gain. The local newspapers sensationalized it as the most heinous crime of the decade. Over the subsequent weeks, further details emerged during the ongoing investigation. Charles was indeed deeply indebted to illicit loan sharks to the tune of $7,000, and they had begun issuing threats of violence. Henry had squandered $5,000 in underground gambling establishments and was also under duress from menacing creditors. They had viewed Ernest's life insurance policy as their sole means of salvation. However, their insatiable greed had prompted them to inflate the policy amounts so drastically that it had inadvertently aroused their own father's suspicions. We also ascertained that the physician who had falsified the death certificate had received $5,000 in cash from Charles. He too was subsequently apprehended for obstruction of justice and the fabrication of official documents. Stephen elucidated the intricate details of the plan Ernest had devised in conjunction with him. "Your husband was considerably more astute than his sons presumed. He harbored forebodings of impending danger, though he could not ascertain its precise nature. He engaged my services not only to investigate Charles and Henry, but also to ensure your safety should anything befall him." "Did he know they intended to kill him?" I inquired. "Not with absolute certainty," Stephen replied. "However, he strongly suspected his life was in peril. This is precisely why we implemented the surveillance devices. This is why we meticulously documented every detail. He was determined to guarantee that, should he perish, the truth would invariably come to light. My late husband, even in his final moments, had been safeguarding me. He had anticipated his son's perfidy and had taken proactive measures to ensure that justice would ultimately prevail. The trial was slated to commence in 2 months. Both Charles and Henry faced charges of first-degree murder, a crime carrying a sentence of 25 years to life in our jurisdiction. The day of the trial arrived after 2 months of rigorous legal preparation. The courtroom was completely filled. Journalists from several regional publications were present to cover what had already been dubbed the Killer Sons case. The entire town had convened. Neighbours, Ernest's former colleagues, even individuals I scarcely knew, were eager to witness this historic moment of justice. I wore my finest black attire, the very same gown I had donned for our wedding many years prior. which now symbolized mourning and an unyielding dignity. Stephen accompanied me, remaining by my side throughout the entirety of the proceedings. His steadfast presence imbued me with the fortitude required to confront what would undoubtedly be the most arduous day of my life. Charles and Henry were escorted into the courtroom, manacled and attired in orange prison jumpsuits. The sight of my sons in such a state inflicted a fresh pang of sorrow, yet I no longer harbored pity for them. I felt only a profound sadness for the moral forfeiture they had chosen long before they physically extinguished their father's life. The prosecutor presented the case with devastating precision. One by one, the recordings were played for the court. An absolute silence permeated the air each time the voices of Charles and Henry were heard, coldly deliberating Ernest's murder. When the prosecutor played the recording detailing their plot to end my life as well, gasps of horror rippled through the audience. An elderly woman rose and departed the courtroom, weeping. I could not fault her. It was an arduous task to comprehend such barbarity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor declared during his opening statement, "this is not a commonplace instance of familial avarice. This is a case of cold and calculated premeditation, wherein two men resolved to murder the father, who had nurtured them with love and sacrifice, solely because they required funds to settle their gambling debts and imprudent loans." Charles and Henry's defense attorneys attempted to construct an argument based on extenuating circumstances and external pressures, but the weight of the evidence was irrefutable. The recordings did not lie. The financial documents did not lie. The forensic evidence confirming the presence of methanol in Ernest's system did not lie. When my turn came to testify, I ascended to the witness stand, my legs trembling but my mind clear. I had anticipated this moment for months. "Mrs. Hayes," the prosecutor inquired, "could you elucidate your relationship with your sons prior to your husband's murder?" "I believed I had a strong relationship with them," I responded, my gaze fixed directly upon Charles and Henry. "I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father labored tirelessly from dawn till dusk to provide them with the best we possibly could. I never envisioned that love and sacrifice would become the very catalyst for his murder." "At any point, did you suspect they might inflict harm upon your husband?" "No. That is the most agonizing aspect of this entire ordeal. I place my complete trust in them. When they informed me that Ernest had suffered an accident at his workshop, I believed them. When they expeditiously organized the funeral, I perceived it as a testament to their efficient grieving process. I never entertained the notion that they were concealing a murder." Charles lowered his head throughout my testimony. Henry regarded me defiantly, yet I observed the glistening tears in his eyes. It was too late for tears. It was too late for remorse. The most poignant moment of the trial arrived when the prosecutor elected to play the entirety of the recording wherein they plotted my own demise. Charles's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Once we secure Dad's insurance money, we must also eliminate Mum. We cannot risk her becoming suspicious." A murmur of horrified consternation swept through the assembled spectators. Several individuals turned to regard me with expressions of disbelief and profound sympathy. "How did you feel when you first heard this recording?" the prosecutor inquired. "I realized that I had lost my two sons long before I lost my husband," I replied, my voice cracking but firm. "The infants I nursed, the children I comforted through their nightmares, had perished and been replaced by two strangers capable of any cruelty for the sake of monetary gain." The defense counsel attempted to cross-examine me, suggesting that perhaps I had misinterpreted my son's intentions, that the grief might have led me to exaggerate the evidence, but the recording spoke for itself. Stephen also testified, meticulously detailing how Ernest had retained him out of fear of his own sons. He described every phase of the investigation, every piece of evidence meticulously gathered, every recorded moment that exposed the truth. The medical examiner presented the findings from the exhumation, confirming the lethal presence of methanol in Ernest's body. He detailed how the toxic substance operated, its gradual progression mirroring the precise afflictions my husband displayed before his passing. Following 3 days of harrowing accounts, the final summations commenced. The prosecutor's presentation was devastating. Charles and Henry were not unfortunate souls caught in unfortunate circumstances. They were predators who viewed their own parents as mere monetary hurdles requiring removal. They meticulously devised, executed, and concealed Ernest's demise, and harboured intentions to inflict the same upon Margot. Compassion is unwarranted for them. What they merit is justice. The jury convened for deliberations lasting 6 hours. Upon their return, the courtroom descended into an absolute hush. I could perceive the frantic cadence of my own heart as the judge began to read the verdict. In the matter of the state versus Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes, concerning the charge of first-degree murder of Ernest Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The chamber then erupted in a cacophony of whispers and exclamations. Charles slumped into his seat, the full weight of his actions finally dawning upon him. Henry remained unnervingly still, his gaze fixed forward, devoid of any discernible emotion. Regarding the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margot Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The judge moved without delay to the sentencing phase. Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes, for the premeditated murder of your father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 30 years. The pronouncement of those words felt like an immense burden being lifted from my spirit. Justice. At long last, Ernest received his due. Post-trial, numerous individuals approached me, offering embraces and expressions of solidarity. Doris wept with me, not from sorrow but from a profound sense of release. Margot, Ernest can finally be at peace, she murmured. That evening I returned to my residence, which now possessed an altered aura. It was no longer a repository of anguish and duplicity. It was my home once more, the sanctuary where Ernest and I had shared 42 years of happiness. Stephen visited me the week following the trial. "How are you feeling?" he inquired. "At peace," I responded with candour. For the first time since Ernest's death, my sleep was undisturbed. I knew he was at rest because his demise had not gone unpunished, and the funds, the insurance policies, the savings. I explained that I had donated the life insurance proceeds to a charitable organization supporting victims of domestic violence. That money was tainted. I could never have utilized it. My personal savings are sufficient for a modest existence for the remainder of my days. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived through the prison mail system, penned by Charles. "Mum, I understand I don't deserve your absolution, but I need you to know that I deeply regret every single action. The money, the outstanding debts, the sheer desperation, they clouded our judgment. We forfeited all semblance of humanity. Henry and I annihilated the most loving family imaginable for $5,000, a sum we never even had the chance to enjoy. Tomorrow I will take my own life in my cell. I cannot endure the burden of what we have done. Take care, Mum. Please tell Dad we are profoundly sorry for being such terrible sons." I did not arrive in time to prevent his suicide. Charles was discovered deceased, having hanged himself in his cell the subsequent day. Upon learning of his brother's demise, Henry experienced a complete mental collapse and was transferred to the prison's psychiatric facility. Today, 2 years after the trial concluded, I reside peacefully in my modest dwelling. I have transformed Ernest's former workshop into a vibrant garden. cultivating flowers that I meticulously arrange for his grave each Sunday. Stephen has evolved into a cherished confidant, visiting me regularly to ensure my well-being. Occasionally, neighbours inquire if I miss my sons. The answer is intricate. I yearn for the children they once were, but those children had vanished long before Ernest's passing. The men they became were not my sons, they were strangers who shared my lineage but not my heart. I have come to understand that true kinship is not defined by shared blood, but by affection, devotion, and mutual esteem. Ernest was my genuine family for 42 years. The friends who offered me solace during the trial now constitute my family. Justice did not restore Ernest to me, but it bestowed upon me a profound sense of tranquility. And on tranquil evenings as I sit on the porch, where we so frequently shared coffee, I earnestly believe I can sense his presence, his pride in my fortitude for choosing the righteous path, even when it necessitated the permanent loss of my sons. 5 years have elapsed since that somber day at the cemetery, when I received the initial correspondence that irrevocably altered the course of my existence. Today I am 71 years of age, and my entirely white hair serves as a testament to the numerous tempests I have weathered and overcome. However, my eyes, as my dear friend Doris often remarks, now sparkle with a serenity they previously lacked. The abode where Ernest and I meticulously constructed our aspirations remains my haven. I have implemented several enhancements utilizing the savings I had accumulated. I have repainted the walls a gentle yellow, Ernest's cherished hue, and transformed his former workshop into the most exquisite garden in the neighborhood. Crimson roses, ivory carnations, and sunflowers that perpetually orient themselves towards the sun precisely as he guided me through our most challenging periods. Stephen Callahan transcended his role as the investigator who facilitated my pursuit of justice. He became an integral part of my chosen family. He visits every Wednesday afternoon, and we partake in coffee on the porch, while he regales me with anecdotes from his other cases. He occasionally poses the question of whether I harbor regrets about reporting my own sons, pondering if adherence to secrecy and complicity in deception would not have been the easier route. Never, I invariably reply. The truth may inflict pain, but falsehoods corrode the very essence of the soul. The foundation I established with the life insurance remuneration has blossomed into something far more significant than I ever envisioned. The Ernest Hayes Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes now extends assistance to dozens of families annually who have endured tribulations akin to my own. We are supported by a cadre of psychologists, legal counsel, and private investigators, all dedicated to ensuring that no other family is compelled to suffer in silence as I once did. 6 months ago, a 40-year-old woman sought my counsel. Her name was Eleonora, and she harbored suspicions that her brother had orchestrated their mother's murder for financial gain. Her narrative echoed my own with painful familiarity. Avaricious relatives, coercive pressures to divest properties, and peculiar behavior following the death. The foundation provided her with the services of a private investigator, complementary legal counsel, and essential psychological support throughout the ensuing proceedings. When her brother was subsequently convicted of murder 3 months later, Eleonora approached me, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Hayes, you have saved my life. Had you not possessed the fortitude to report your own sons, I would never have mustered the courage to expose mine." Such moments serve as poignant reminders of the profound worth of all the suffering I endured. Henry persists in his existence, though he is a mere shadow of the man I once knew. Following Charles's suicide, his mental faculties completely disintegrated. Medical professionals assert that he exists in a perpetual state of remorse and apprehension, convinced that Ernest visits him nightly to admonish him for the homicide. He has attempted self-annihilation on 3 occasions, Yet the prison guards maintain constant vigilance over him. I occasionally receive correspondence from him. These missives are incoherent, saturated with desperate apologies and pleas for clemency. Initially, I perused them, searching for any vestige of the son I had nurtured with such profound affection. However, I subsequently recognized that engaging with these letters merely reopened wounds that had begun to scab over. Now I retain them unread in a shoebox. Perhaps one day I shall finally confront their contents. Perhaps not. I am entitled to safeguard my peace of mind. Jasmine vanished from town immediately subsequent to the trial's conclusion. I received word that she relocated to the city and assumed a new identity. I harbour no animosity towards her. Bearing the surname of a murderer must undoubtedly present a considerable burden. At times I ponder whether she was privy to Charles's machinations, whether she was a silent accomplice to Ernest's murder. However, these inquiries pertain to the past, and I have cultivated the ability to reside firmly in the present. The township of Spring Creek will forever retain the memory of this case. It has ascended to the status of a local legend, a cautionary tale recounted by parents to their offspring regarding the insidious nature of avarice and perfidy. Some regard me as a heroine, while others perceive me as a heartless woman who consigned her own progeny to incarceration. Their opinions hold no sway over me. I am privy to the truth, and that truth has granted me the solace I so desperately required. My health remains remarkably robust for my advanced age. The physician attributes this to my eventual emancipation from the pervasive stress and melancholy that had long weighed me down. The corporeal form heals when the heart finds its repose, he explained during my most recent medical examination. Sunday mornings are my most cherished segment of the week. I gather freshly cut blooms from my garden and embark on a pilgrimage to the cemetery to pay my respects at Ernest's grave. His headstone now bears an inscription that I commissioned following the trial. Ernest Hayes, beloved husband, betrayed father, honourable man. His love possessed a potency that transcended his mortality. I relay to him every occurrence of the preceding week. I discourse with him about the Foundation's endeavours, the families we have aided, and the effusive gratitude expressed in letters from individuals who attained justice due to our narrative. I swear I can perceive his approbation carried upon the breeze that rustles the foliage of the adjacent arboreal specimens. Do you know what is most peculiar, my beloved? I confided during my recent visit. I no longer experience any distress when my thoughts turn to Charles and Henry. I am overcome solely by pity for their circumstance, having been endowed with an abundance of love, and choosing instead to embrace animosity. Pity for their possession of a family that adored them, yet they opted for treachery. Pity for their squandered opportunity to emulate your honourable character, opting instead to become perpetrators of murder. Last week, a journalist from the city sought an interview for a documentary focusing on familial transgressions. She inquired if there was any message I wished to convey to others navigating analogous predicaments. Family does not serve as an extenuation for criminal conduct, I responded. Affection is not inherently blind. Love tempered with appropriate boundaries constitutes genuine affection. If an individual professing their love for you is capable of inflicting harm upon you for pecuniary gain or personal convenience, then that individual does not truly love you, and it is unequivocally never too late to seek justice, irrespective of the perpetrator's identity. This year, on the 5th anniversary of Ernest's passing, I orchestrated a commemorative ceremony in his honour. Over 200 individuals graced the occasion with their presence. Neighbours, members of the Foundation, families we have assisted, and local dignitaries. It was profoundly moving to witness how his demise, which commenced as a devastating tragedy, had ultimately metamorphosed into a catalyst for positive change in countless lives. Stephen delivered a particularly poignant address. Ernest Hayes perished due to the rapacity of his sons, he stated. However, his enduring legacy lives on in every family that finds vindication through the courage of his wife. Malice attempted to obliterate his story, but goodness transformed it into a beacon of hope for others. In the quietude of the night before retiring, I occasionally retrieve old photographs depicting Charles and Henry during their childhood. I observe them frolicking in the garden, embracing their father, their laughter mingling with mine during past Christmases. I permit myself to weep for those innocent children who once existed before avarice utterly corrupted them. However, I no longer shed tears for the men they ultimately became. Those men actively selected their destinies. My narrative has ultimately transcended my personal tragedy, evolving into a symbol that justice is attainable, even when its source is remarkably unexpected. A 66-year-old widow has demonstrably proven that truth possesses a greater potency than deception, that authentic love triumphs over betrayal, and that it is never too late to embrace the righteous path. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and Stephen will arrive for our customary coffee rendezvous. I shall prepare his favourite pastry and apprise him of the correspondence I have received this week. Subsequently, we shall collaborate in the garden, tending to the nascent blooms of spring. Life persists, simpler yet more genuine than it was previously. I have attained the understanding that true familial bonds are not predicated on shared ancestry, but rather on shared principles, mutual reverence, and a love that never devolves into injurious conduct. Ernest, wherever you may be, I sincerely hope you are aware that I have steadfastly adhered to the solemn vow I made to you at your graveside on that calamitous day. I unearthed the truth, I pursued justice, and I transmuted our profound sorrow into a source of hope for others. Your passing, my dearest love, was not in vain. Did you find my story compelling? And from which city are you tuning in? Let us engage in conversation in the comments section. If this narrative has resonated with you, your support through a super thanks would be invaluable, enabling me to continue presenting such stories. I extend my profound gratitude for your gracious encouragement. I eagerly anticipate your reflections on the narrative. On your screen, you will find 2 additional life narratives that I highly commend. My channel offers a wealth of further content. Please remember to subscribe. Until our next life story unfolds.